Tonight on the Daily Debrief, why is a woman suspected of kidnapping her husband's mistress seen on video buying a pregnancy test just before the mistress disappeared? And dramatic video of police trying to save a one-week-old baby. Plus, the high-profile attorney who wants to fight the president's son, not in a courtroom, but in a cage. Also, the Real Housewives star who's being kicked out of the country. That's tonight on the Daily Debrief. And good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Debrief. It's your place to catch up on the hottest action in American courtrooms, along with what's going on in American law today. First to Michigan tonight, where charges of murder involve a snowblower and an easement dispute. Defendant Wendell Popejoy apparently admitted shooting his neighbor in the back of the head the day after Christmas last year. He said the neighbor, Sheila Bonge, was blowing snow on a driveway in front of his house. The rights to the land she was clearing of snow were in dispute. Popejoy faces open murder charges. Jurors will have to decide the appropriate degree of the charge depending on what prosecutors actually prove in court. Today in court, witnesses described finding the victim's body and the legal battle concerning that easement. To South Carolina now, where prosecutors are hoping to convince jurors that a wife who caught her husband having an affair is guilty of kidnapping the mistress after chaining her husband to their bed in order to keep him home. Tabby Moorer is on trial for conspiracy to kidnap 20-year-old Heather Elvis. Prosecutors say Moorer chained her husband to the bed for a while and then threatened the victim. Prosecutors theorize that the defendant and her husband eventually worked together to get rid of the victim after the victim turned up pregnant. The victim disappeared back in 2013. Elvis's vehicle turned up, but her whereabouts remain unknown. Prosecutors say they have no idea where she is. Today, prosecutors introduced security footage showing the defendant buying a pregnancy test right before that victim disappeared. However, one witness said cell phone records do not necessarily put the defendant and her husband together with the victim at the time of the victim's disappearance. Francie Higgs is an attorney and a former prosecutor who joins us here on the Law and Crime Network from time to time. Francie's going to help us break down some of these cases. Francie, good to see you today.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so what do you make of this case out of South Carolina here? We've got prosecutors saying that they're going after this kidnapping charge, even though authorities really think this defendant and her husband did something a lot worse. But prosecutors aren't going for what my law school professors used to call the whole enchilada. They're going for a lesser charge, kidnapping, because they think that's all the evidence that they have.
Well, it's interesting, Aaron, because, of course, there are many, many case examples where prosecutors try murder cases without a body, without a victim's body. And it seems to me if this girl had any connections to the community, any family or friends, any cell phone activity, she's 20 years old, a millennial, clearly, she's probably on her phone all the time, that suddenly ceased. It seems like they'd be able to make a decent argument for murder here, but it's interesting that they're just going with kidnapping.
It really is. And back to this Michigan case that we're also covering here, Francie, you got an easement dispute, a woman snowblowing, and that somehow leads to shots in the back of the head. What do you make of it? I mean, where does this come from?
Aaron, this is just a shocking act of violence over some sort of property dispute that I just cannot imagine. And apparently he just outright confessed and said, sure, I shot her in the head because she was blowing snow on my easement. It's crazy.
It is. What do you make of this so-called open murder charge where prosecutors can go in and say, well, jurors, you can pick whether it's first degree or second degree?
You know, I don't like that, Aaron. I mean, as a prosecutor, maybe it's because I'm also a control freak, but as a prosecutor, I like to be able to describe the elements of the crime to the jury, tell them which element meets the facts of the case and the law, and tell them which crime I think they ought to convict on. And here you're going to have the prosecutor kind of going back and forth. Well, it's this, but it's also this. And I just think that creates uncertainty.
Well, it's certainly a different tactic. Francie, I know we'll talk to you again here later on in the broadcast. On now to Oregon, where a group of Oregon sheriff's deputies are being hailed as heroes tonight for helping save a one-week-old baby by using CPR. And get this, the incident was caught on surveillance video released by the Clackamas County Sheriff's Department. It shows the baby's parents walking through a shopping center. They noticed their baby was not breathing, so they called for help. 3 deputies rushed in minutes later. All three performed CPR until paramedics arrived. The baby is named Audrey Harmon, and her parents huddled nearby, hugging one another as emergency crews worked frantically to save their little girl. At last report, baby Audrey remains in intensive care, but she's steadily improving. Her parents asked the deputies to stop by the hospital for a series of photos. They hope to show the photos to their child someday to remind her of the people who saved her life. A rap artist who was shot and killed during a summer robbery has won a prestigious Album of the Year award. XXX Tentacion died in June while leaving a Florida motorsports business back on June 18th. Police say 4 suspects stole his Louis Vuitton bag, which held $50,000 in cash, before pulling the trigger. But the rapper's latest compilation still won Favorite Album at this year's American Music Awards. XXX Tentacion's mother accepted the award on his behalf at the ceremony. The rapper was 20 years old. Updates tonight in the recent confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. The judge took the oath of office and hired a roster of law clerks, all of whom are female. But questions remain about the fallout. Joining me now is Law and Crime senior editor Ron Blitzer, who's been following all of this as the case progressed. Ron, good to see you here on the Daily Debrief.
Good to be here, Aaron.
Okay, so what do you make of this? The judge is on the court, but a group has registered BrettKavanaugh.com as a web domain name, and it doesn't go anywhere with direct reference to the judge. Rather, it goes towards the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Overboard or appropriate? What do you make of it?
I'd say probably somewhere in between. It's not going out of its way to bash Kavanaugh outside of, I guess, implying that he is guilty of the allegations that were leveled against him. But it's really more focusing on victims of sexual assault instead of really focusing on Kavanaugh and those allegations. The website, BrettKavanaugh.com, provides resources to victims of sexual violence. It was set up by the organization FixTheCourt.com, and it's really meant to help people more than put others down.
Hillary Clinton said the other day that the accusations her own husband, President Bill Clinton, faced are nothing like what happened to Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, she said that with Bill Clinton, that there was a lengthy partisan investigation, and that's the difference between what happened with him and what's happened with Kavanaugh and allegations against Donald Trump. That's the kind of statement from Hillary Clinton that at first glance it may sound accurate, but it really isn't. If you remember what happened with Bill Clinton, the investigation into his actions were not focused exactly on the allegations against him, more about his behavior in terms of lying and potential obstruction of justice surrounding the Paula Jones allegations that were in a separate civil lawsuit that Clinton later settled for, I think, $850,000. What Clinton and Kavanaugh have in common is that neither of their cases ended up before criminal courts. Both were ultimately settled in one way, shape, or form by the U.S. Senate. Kavanaugh, his allegations were brought up, as we all know, in the context of his Supreme Court confirmation. So he wasn't really facing any kind of litigation about whether or not he committed these offenses, even though arguments were made in that context. It was really up to the Senate to determine whether or not he was fit to be on the court, not whether or not he committed a crime based on any standard of proof. Likewise, with Bill Clinton, his impeachment charges went before the Senate, but that was really regarding lying about certain allegations or certain events regarding Monica Lewinsky or Paula Jones. And the Senate, in what was more of a trial-like atmosphere, but really, again, a political event, was cleared by a partisan vote in the Senate.
So ultimately, the Senate makes the decision, and the Senate is oftentimes driven by politics, as your final analysis here. Now, very quickly, Ron, some people are saying Kavanaugh should sue his accusers for defamation or something like that. You wrote on lawandcrime.com that would be a terrible idea. Why?
Listen, I understand that if you believe that Kavanaugh is innocent of these allegations, that you would want those who leveled those allegations to be held accountable. I get that. And what we have in our legal system is a means to do that through defamation suits for libel or slander. However, Kavanaugh just went through a rigorous confirmation process. He appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee multiple times, answered a lot of questions about this. And whether you believe him when he denies these allegations or not, I don't understand why he would ever want to have to relitigate this issue again. He was confirmed to the Supreme Court. He is now a justice on the Supreme Court. He's hearing cases this week. If he is innocent of the charges, I think that he'd be best served to just put this behind him. If he's guilty, just be glad that he was able to be confirmed. Because what's important to remember is that one of the main arguments in his favor during this confirmation process was that normally when you're accused of a crime, if this goes before a court, you have to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. If he were to sue, he would then have to prove that the allegations were false. Why put the burden of proof on yourself?
Why put yourself in that position? Look, Ron, we got to move on. Thanks a lot for your analysis. These stories and more about Kavanaugh on lawandcrime.com. Hotshot attorney Michael Avenatti has challenged Donald Trump Jr. to an actual physical fight, and no, we're not making this up. Avenatti gained national attention by representing porn star Stormy Daniels and later Julie Swetnick. Daniels sued Donald Trump. Swetnick was one of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh's sexual assault accusers. Avenatti tweeted yesterday that he would fight the president's son in an MMA-style rumble with a full 3 rounds. That's if the proceeds went to charity. Avenatti later tweeted that his cut of the profits would go to rebuild hurricane-ravaged Puerto Rico and towards the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. It does not appear Trump Jr. has responded. First Lady Melania Trump saying corroboration is necessary if women make accusations of sexual assault. She said women need, quote, really hard evidence. The statement misstates the law in most states, but Mrs. Trump made the comments during an interview with ABC News while on a recent trip to Africa. She says Americans should support both accusers and the accused in the so-called Me Too movement. A candidate running unopposed for a judge's seat in Michigan is accused of suggesting special treatment during a drunk driving arrest. Police in Royal Oak near Detroit pulled Julie McDonald over for throwing a cigarette out of her window, failing to signal a turn, and speeding. She said she hadn't had anything to drink since the night before, but police say a breathalyzer indicated a blood alcohol level of 0.10. That's above the legal limit of 0.08. After she was in the squad car, she told officers she was, quote, running for an office. Then she said, and we're paraphrasing here, that her arrest would cause trouble. McDonald was running for a seat on the Oakland County, Michigan Circuit Court. An internet page discussing her campaign appears to have disappeared. Back for more analysis on this and some of the stories we just talked about is Francie Higgs. Francie, look, if you're running for a judge's position, bottom line, it's not a good look to be suggesting special treatment if you get pulled over for some kind of drunk driving accusation.
Well, not only is it a bad look, Aaron, but it's just a stupid thing to do. She should know better, and it really calls into question her judgment.
Yeah, look, a lot we could break down about this. We're waiting to see exactly what the appearance looks like when she's finally due in court. Still ahead tonight on the Daily Debrief here on the Law and Crime Network, a man America loved to hate during the O.J. Simpson trial now has his own TV show. Plus, a star from Real Housewives might not be in the country for much longer. We break down a surprising order from a federal judge when we return on the Daily Debrief. Came to an abrupt halt this week in a cold case murder trial dating back to 1985. 24-year-old Charla Spangler was found with her wrists duct taped together, and she was shot to death. Her body had been left under a semi-truck in a Columbus, Ohio area parking lot. The victim was a dancer and was last seen leaving work. Her car was still running in the parking lot at work when she was found dead further away. Defendant Doug Krumloff was arrested on domestic violence charges, but his fingerprints matched those recovered from duct tape at the crime scene. Jury selection was supposed to begin today, but the prosecution said DNA testing was not complete. The judge put the trial off and let the defendant out on house arrest. A new trial date has not yet been set. A Michigan man convicted of killing a little girl learned his ultimate fate this week. 29-year-old Brad Fields will spend the rest of his natural life in prison without the possibility of parole. That's according to a sentence handed down yesterday morning. A jury convicted Fields of killing his girlfriend's 4-year-old daughter on New Year's Day. Gabby Barrett had been physically abused and ultimately died from an infection after she had been scalded, authorities said. A similar criminal trial for the little girl's mother is scheduled for next spring. An infamous face from the O.J. Simpson case is getting his own TV show. Former LAPD Detective Mark Fuhrman will deliver a show called The Fuhrman Diaries on Fox's streaming network called Fox Nation. According to a statement this week, Fuhrman will reveal private thoughts and analysis on criminal cases that have defined America. Fuhrman found a bloody glove at O.J. Simpson's home after the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. He later pleaded the fifth when asked if he planted evidence. He was also cross-examined about his use of racist language. Continuing on here, we have a lot more to talk about here on the Daily Debrief. We are going to take a look now at other crimes making headlines. Here's Anthony Velez.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. A man accused of stealing over $1 million worth of rare wines from his ex-boss committed suicide minutes before he was expected to plead guilty in court. 41-year-old Nicholas DeMeyer, a former assistant to Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon, leapt to his death from the 33rd floor of the Carlyle Hotel in Manhattan. DeMeyer was expected to plead guilty to stealing $1.2 million worth of rare wine from Solomon and faced up to 10 years in prison on one count of interstate transport of stolen property. A man in Tennessee is under arrest after he allegedly beat his girlfriend with a brick before running over her body repeatedly with a car. 34-year-old Santrez Traylor reportedly killed Amanda Petrowski, the mother of his children, in front of neighbors at Petrowski's Memphis home. According to investigators, Traylor had a history of domestic abuse and stalking arrests. Traylor is now charged with second-degree murder and aggravated assault. The husband of Real Housewives of New Jersey, Teresa Giudice, was ordered to return to his native Italy at the end of his prison sentence. Giuseppe Joe Giudice is currently serving a 41-month sentence after he and his wife pleaded guilty to 41 counts of fraud in 2014. Teresa served 11 months in federal custody before being released in 2015. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for the Daily Debrief.
Immigration attorney Francisco Hernandez is on the line with us here at the Law&Crime Network to help us break down this Real Housewives case. Francisco, thanks a lot for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so break this down. How is it that legally this guy is getting kicked out of the country after his federal criminal sentence?
Well, it's basically based on his aggravated felony charge in federal court. He was not a citizen. I guess he's been here since birth, but he's never become a citizen. So once he got charged, he couldn't become a citizen while the case was pending. And once he was sentenced in federal court, if you basically fraud, over a year long sentence, I mean, there's probably 4 or 5 reasons why the person is deportable, no matter how long they've been here. And that's one thing that we keep preaching. Why don't you get your citizenship as soon as you can? We worry about undocumented people coming here and not wanting to become citizens. They would if they could, but this guy could have decades ago.
Yeah, I had another question along those lines here. The housewife herself is an American citizen, so could he simply apply for citizenship on the premise that he's married to someone who is a citizen, or is it too late for that and you're already shaking your head?
No, that ship has sailed. He was eligible for citizenship long before he got into any trouble, so he should have become a citizen. The fact that he's got a wife and kids, it doesn't matter now. He was already married. I don't know what was the reason, what was the grounds for him getting his legal residency in the first place. Apparently, he was quite young, so I'm guessing it was through his parents or through a relative here, some sort of a immigrant visa. I can still scratch my head at why he wouldn't become citizen. I don't see any relief unless somehow he got a pardon or the sentence was somehow reduced to less than a year, but I don't see that happening.
And quickly, Francisco, what's the probability that this family will have to move to Italy now?
Well, I think that's an economic decision, not a legal decision. They can either afford it or not, you know, as opposed to being deported to Africa or South America or Honduras or El Salvador. At least he's going to a nice country. I love Italy. I visited quite a few times. I would love to retire there, just not forcibly.
I appreciate you joining us, Francisco Hernandez, immigration attorney. Thanks a lot. A look back now at an explosive case which resulted in an emotional verdict late last week. An El Paso, Texas man stood and faced the jury Friday night after facing 2 previous trials on double murder charges. The first trial was a mistrial for defendant Daniel Villegas. The second was a conviction overturned on appeal. Here was the reaction this time around.
Yeah, I felt like that was well timed. You added the sauce.
Madam Presiding Juror, have you in fact reached a verdict? Could you please hand the charge and the verdict form to the bailiff, who will deliver it to the court so that I can ensure that it is in proper form? The court does find that the verdict is in proper form. If the defendant will please stand. In the District Court of El Paso County, Texas, 409th Judicial District, the State of Texas versus Daniel Villegas, number 94-0D09328. Verdict Form B. We, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Villegas not guilty of...
I can watch that time and time again. Francie Higgs, I don't know about you, but I can never remember seeing any sort of reaction in a courtroom that tops that.
Yeah, you know, Aaron, I've seen courtrooms that have reacted like that to both guilty and not guilty verdicts, and I'm just always so troubled by it. You've got victims here who are dead, and for whatever reason, the prosecution, well, obviously they thought they had sufficient evidence to bring the case 3 different times. And so what you're left with is one side of the courtroom celebrating the not guilty verdict, and you've got the other side of the courtroom who must be devastated at the person going free that at least they believe committed murder. So I just think it's sad, actually, on both sides.
Yeah, it's an emotional emotional situation all the way around, Francie. But your opinion, spoken like a true prosecutor. Remember the victims as well as the defendant in a case like this. Francie, we appreciate you joining us here on the Debrief.
Thanks, Aaron.
And that's all the time we have today for the Daily Debrief. A reminder that the Law and Crime Network will be streaming trials beginning tomorrow at 9 a.m. From all of us at the Law and Crime Network, this is Aaron Keller. Have a good night. We will see you back here tomorrow.